Now the news from ITN.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
America's ready to send peacekeeping troops to Bosnia. Government calls Tory rebels bluff over Maastricht. How an IRA bomber went undercover in suburbia. And babies can drink it, but why was the apple juice scare kept secret? Good evening. America announced tonight that it's putting its weight behind the diplomatic attempt to negotiate peace in Bosnia and said that it might send troops. Their job would be to enforce the deal. President Clinton has also decided on tougher economic sanctions against Serbia. His Secretary of State Warren Christopher said America's conscience wouldn't passively accept the Serbs' brutality. The new administration had hesitated for a fortnight before announcing its policy in Bosnia. Our Washington correspondent Bill Neely has the details.
The people demand and deserve...
Bill Clinton is backing into Bosnia. The president who once said he wouldn't send troops there is poised to do just that and confident of public support.
I think they will want us to do more, want us to do it in a prudent way, and I think that they will support this policy.
We cannot afford to ignore it.
The US said today it would now get involved in the peace talks directly, and if there is agreement, it would help enforce it.
We are prepared to use our military power to enforce the agreement if necessary, and I hope that it will be unnecessary to reach that point.
The US also promised tougher sanctions on Serbia, a war crimes tribunal, and more humanitarian aid. US troops would not be sent in to stop the fighting. They would go as part of a multinational peacekeeping force that would include British, French and Russian troops. But first, there has to be a peace to keep. Leaders of the warring factions are at the United Nations in New York, but have yet to meet. That's the next step. The Bosnians today welcomed the offer of US troops, saying their cities have been bombed back into the Stone Age.
Population in eastern Bosnia and Herzegovina is the most endangered species in the world at this moment.
Let's go get him, knock him down, stop this fooling around.
On the talk show circuit, Lord Owen, selling his peace plan that America once ridiculed but is now using as its blueprint, and urging the US to send 5,000 troops in a 20,000 troop force.
And when is the United States going to have its own GIs in blueberries? Here you are, the most powerful country in the world. How much longer can you stand aside and not contribute forces in any serious numbers to UN peacekeeping?
Today's decision represents a major shift in American policy, committing troops, if necessary, to what the US once called a quagmire. Bill Neely, News at 10, Washington.
Here, the government raised the stakes tonight in the Conservative Party row over Europe. The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd said it wouldn't ratify Maastricht at all if a Labour amendment on the social chapter was carried in the Commons. Lord Tebbit had earlier urged his fellow rebels to vote with Labour to wreck Maastricht, and he welcomed Mr. Hurd's statement. The vote is in about 6 weeks' time. Here's our political editor, Michael Brunson.
The Downing Street line today, reinforced perhaps by the gift to the Prime Minister of his grip cast in bronze, is that they will not lose the vote on the Labour amendment. Quite heavy. But Norman Tebbit doesn't believe it, so he's pressing on with his campaign against what he called today the foul abomination of the Maastricht Treaty, though he insists that voting for the Labour amendment does not mean voting for the social chapter.
What we're supporting is an amendment which would take it out, and we could vote against any other amendment, but it only requires one amendment to be made to this treaty for the whole treaty to collapse. That's why I said today that personally I would vote for an amendment which said the moon was made of blue cheese if it was going to get a majority, because that would destroy the treaty.
But with Maastricht causing trouble again, the Downing Street calm is slipping a little. At a lunch for President Kravchuk of Ukraine today, the Prime Minister told him anyone who thinks democracy is plain sailing ought to spend 5 minutes as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And the danger of the Tebbit vote with Labour call is serious enough for one generally Eurosceptic cabinet minister to attack it.
Everybody knows what is at stake here. This is a Labour Party amendment. It is designed to bring into this country all those intrusive burdens which would so damage our competitiveness, damage jobs, damage our prosperity.
But as a visit to the Tory Euro rebel headquarters shows, and perhaps it's no accident that it's in what used to be Lady Thatcher's headquarters, they have a formidable operation underway, organising and briefing their supporters and watching every government move. And they certainly took note today of some words of Douglas Hurd's.
There's no question of our ratifying a treaty other than the one we negotiated. We couldn't, and our partners know this very well, we couldn't because the damage which we see in our analysis, the Conservative Party's analysis, the damage which would be done to British industry and British jobs would be very substantial.
Now, to Norman Tebbit, that meant put the social chapter in and wreck the treaty.
In a way, what Mr. Hurd was saying today was inciting Tories to vote for the social chapter.
But at Downing Street, after the Ukrainians' visit, full support for Mr. Hurd. He was just underlining, the Prime Minister's people explained tonight, the fact that by trying Tebbit's style to unpick bits of Maastricht, you lose the whole of it and all the benefits to Britain of the deal Mr. Major pulled off.
Michael Brunson joins us now from Westminster. Michael, have the Tory rebels welcomed Lord Tebbit's advice?
Well, perhaps rather surprisingly, an awful lot of them haven't. That's because some of them think that that Lord Tebbit hasn't thought through all the legal complexities which surround this complicated Labour amendment. Others are very worried about the prospect of being done over by the whips for the next 6 weeks. Remember what happened last time. And then there's a third group who are very worried indeed about what the reaction will be among the Tory party faithful back home if they're seen to be voting with Labour on anything.
So how does it stack up? Will the government win this vote?
Well, I think it's much too early to say, to be frank. And one of the things you've got to remember is that last time on that absolutely crucial vote on what was called the paving debate, the government scraped home by just 3 votes. Now, they did that with Liberal Democrat support. And this time, we already know that they won't get that Liberal Democrat support.
Michael Brunson, thank you. The IRA's odd couple, a 37-year-old terrorist and his 60-year-old lover, were jailed at the Old Bailey today. James Canning was given 30 years for plotting explosions in London and for possessing Semtex. Audrey Lamb got 3. She helped Canning and gave him money. They lived in her house. He kept Semtex under their bed. ITN's Joan Thurkettle reports on the trial that revealed a great deal about how IRA cells on mainland Britain operate.
James Canning and Audrey Lamb brought to the Old Bailey amidst tight security for the last day of the trial. The case has centred around a suburban bungalow in West London, the home of 60-year-old Audrey Lamb. It was the perfect cover for James Canning, described by the judge as an IRA quartermaster. Audrey Lamb, a lonely, anxious woman, had fallen head over heels in love with Wee Jimmy, as he was known, 20 years her junior. They'd met in a local pub. She'd just been deserted after a 20-year affair and was sad and vulnerable, but he used her unscrupulously. Canning was involved in a string of IRA attacks. The Kalashnikov rifle used in the attempted assassination of the former Gibraltar governor was in Canning's garage. His fingerprints were found at the scene of an attempted bomb attack on the Beck Theatre in West London, where the Blues and Royals band was due to play. It didn't explode because of a faulty switch. Had it done so, 300 people would have been at risk. He supplied the fire bombs for the attack on the Brent Cross shopping centre in North London. Also the bomb which exploded in Whitehall, close to Downing Street and the MOD. Canning also provided the device which exploded at London Bridge Station a year ago, injuring 29 people. Undercover officers had been secretly watching Canning's home. The jury was shown video, not released by the court, of Audrey Lamb blowing kisses to her lover as he set off for the day. It also showed Canning at the lock-up garage where he kept arms and ammunition. In the quiet, anonymous bungalow, police found Semtex under the bed and in the garden. Neighbours suspected nothing.
Devastated when we read about the Semtex and what have you. And recently we heard that the Semtex was in the house. It could have blown us all off.
Audrey Lamb struck a pathetic figure in court, clearly fearful of reprisals. Sentencing, Mr. Justice Leonard told Audrey Lamb, "I am aware that life has treated you very harshly. It must have been a considerable relief to you, in fact a joy, when this younger man came along. Nevertheless, what you did was wrong. Audrey Lamb left the dock as she has sat through much of this case in tears. Joan Thurkettle, News at 10 at the Old Bailey.
A 27-year-old British girl who's been arrested for smuggling heroin in Thailand has said she needed the money to get home. Sandra Gregory from West Yorkshire was arrested with another Briton, Robert Locke, at Bangkok Airport. Glenn O'Glaser at ITN has our report.
Sandra Gregory, who's 27, was arrested with 29-year-old Robert Locke at Bangkok Airport. Locke claims he'd never met her before. She says it was his idea to smuggle the heroin and, clearly distressed, has admitted her guilt to the Thai authorities.
I've told them everything I know. I've answered all their questions truthfully. They've got me. They've got photographs. I've admitted it. I was stupid. I've made a mistake. I needed the money. I want the money to go home.
Sandra Gregory worked in a pub near her home in Halifax before going to Thailand to teach English 2 years ago.
She didn't say she was going until the week before she went. And jokingly we told her that she would finish up in a Thailand jail, you know, sad, because she probably will.
If convicted, she'll be moved to the Ban Ken prison, where British women Karen Smith and Patricia Cahill are jailed. Karen Smith's lawyer says Sandra Gregory might stay there for the rest of her life.
One would expect a formal death sentence, usually, in fact always, for Westerners commuted to life, which means 100 years, and they do give you no remission in Thailand for drug offences.
At any rate, it's likely to be many years before Sandra Gregory returns to her home in Halifax. Her parents have flown to Bangkok to be with their daughter in court tomorrow.
Iraq says it won't release the two Britons, Paul Ride and Michael Wainwright. Their families are in Baghdad at the moment. The Deputy Iraqi Prime Minister Tariq Aziz said Iraq would not let them go until Britain lifted the freeze on Iraqi assets imposed after the Gulf War. Apple juice doesn't damage your health, the Agriculture Minister Nicholas Soames told the Commons today. He said it's even safe for babies. But Labour insisted that's not the real issue. They say people should have been told about the discovery of a cancer-causing chemical in juice so they could make up their own minds. Kevin Dunn has our report.
The government tested 32 apple juices last year and discovered in 5 of them quantities of the toxic chemical patchoulin which exceeded safety levels. But it kept the results of the test secret. In the Commons, Labour complained of a cover-up.
Because of the Minister's failure to act last year to take that apple juice off the shelves and not to make the information public, that Britain's food is not safe in his right honourable gentleman's hands.
The food safety standards in this country are the highest in the world, and the honourable gentleman does no service to the consumer or the food industry by this ridiculous and idiotic scaremongering.
Patchoulin is produced by the mould on bruised apples. Research has indicated it might cause cancer and birth defects. But the scientist who carried out the test said the quantities he had traced were too small to be harmful.
It's a problem where any mouldy fruit has escaped through into the production of the apple juice. But I'd have to say that you need to drink something like 140 litres of apple juice per day before you would achieve any ill effects from patchoulin as far as is known.
Since July, the industry has started testing every batch of apple juice it produces. It defended its decision to keep last year's tests secret.
It was the Ministry's information, it was the Ministry's tests. If anybody was going to release it, it would have to have been them and not us. We were just anxious that the wrong information didn't get out.
The government now says the information will be published next month, and it has made repeated assurances, backed up by all the big supermarkets, that apple juice is safe to drink.
The Social Security Secretary Peter Lilly told the Commons tonight that the basic state retirement pension and child benefit were safe from the review of public spending announced on Monday. He said there were no plans to means test the pension. Child benefit too would continue to be paid to all families and be uprated in line with prices. Coming next on News at 10, the 11-year-old Hartlepool boy who crashed a stolen car into a house. The appeal begins of a man convicted of murdering his cellmate, why he claims he was framed. And underage sex. Focus on Britain reports on the growing problem.
It's not just boys, girls, girlfriends pressure the other friends saying, oh, well, we've done it, why don't you?
This symbol outside means you have the standard inside that an entire library of software has been written to. The Intel microprocessor. Think of it as a library card that lets you run the software of today and tomorrow. So look for computers that have Intel inside.
We saved £100 on the same holiday as our friends.
By booking at Lund Poly.
Ah, get away.
Every day, thousands of savers receive a cheque from Legal & General. A ray of sunshine from the big company with the umbrella. Legal & General. Trust us to deliver.
Here, Frank. How's your mate getting on down at Giovanni's? Lewis? I don't know. I haven't spoken to him for weeks. I thought you two went way back. Yeah, we did. Nah, but you know how it is. Been up to my balls recently.
Order the table, please, Frank! Lewis. Oh, Chubby.
Giovanni's. Frank!
Ah, how you doing, wee man? I've been meaning to call you, but you know how it is. I've been up to my eyeballs recently. So how's it going? Listen, you'll never guess who's working here. Chubby Johnston.
You're joking? Oh!
A dream's for, if not to come true.
On News at 10 last night, we reported the problems caused by young car thieves in West Belfast. Tonight, the story shifts to Hartlepool. Juvenile car crime is nothing new to the northeast. But today, there was another alarming example of how young the criminals are, in this case, a boy of 11, and what little regard they have for the law. Here's our Home Affairs reporter, Harry Smith.
The owner of this corner house in Hartlepool was opening his front gate this morning when a stolen car careered out of control and ploughed through the fence just a few feet from where he was standing. At the wheel of the car was an 11-year-old boy.
He was at the wheel. I saw him, the first thing I saw was trying to get the wheel round, you know, to get around the corner, but obviously couldn't get it around far enough. Too small.
The boy was arrested by police who'd been chasing the car, but after an hour and a half in the police station, he was back, swaggering along the road and taunting his victim. He'd been summoned for stealing the car to the juvenile panel and then released. He was now free and apparently blaming the police.
Ramming them, made no need for it, you know.
Did they ram you?
Yes, rammed them.
Rammed
us.
How old are you?
11 years old.
As the youngster rejoined his friends, police admitted they were virtually powerless.
Once they are charged or reported by us, it's completely out of our hands. It's dealt with by the courts.
And apparently they're back on the street sometimes within half an hour?
Very shortly afterwards, yes.
It's a case which typifies the concerns of people on estates like this. In the northeast of England, so-called joyriding has become an epidemic.
This is the second time this has happened to our garden. It is not as bad this time as last year. January the 3rd last year, they came through the garden, took part of the house as well.
While the families here wait for the next incident, the youngster was back among friends, being greeted as a hero.
The appeal began today for a man jailed for killing someone he'd never met until they were put in the same police cell. Malcolm Kennedy was found guilty of punching and kicking Patrick Quinn to death on Christmas Eve in 1990. He says he was framed. ITN's David Rose reports.
Malcolm Kennedy's father has always been convinced his son is innocent. Today he was at the High Court to hear Malcolm's appeal against his conviction for murder and his life sentence.
There's abundance of new evidence if they're allowed to hear it.
Why are you so sure he's innocent?
I just can't conceive him having done such a horrific crime.
It all started at Hammersmith Police Station on Christmas Eve 1990. Two drunk men, Kennedy and Patrick Quinn, were locked up in one police cell. In the morning, Quinn was dead. Kennedy said he'd seen a fight, but he'd been hit and told to keep out of it. The police said Kennedy had murdered his cellmate. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. But last year, ITV's World in Action revealed apparent contradictions in police evidence given at Kennedy's trial. And today, a new witness, Samantha Wood, told the court what had happened at the police station at the time of Quinn's murder. With Kennedy listening intently from the dock, his lawyer, Michael Mansfield, said Miss Wood's evidence cast doubt on the police version of events. A 6-month investigation by the Police Complaints Authority into Kennedy's allegations found that police records, police pocketbooks, and radio and telephone records relating to the case had either been lost or been destroyed. Malcolm Kennedy's appeal is continuing. David Rose, News at 10 at the High Court.
Now tonight's focus on Britain, the shocking case of the 15-year-old Welsh girl raped by a classmate at a school in Newport caused public outrage because of the judge's controversial decision to free the boy with a £500 fine. But the case also drew attention to the broader issue of underage sex. Although sex between under 16s is illegal, the evidence suggests it's increasingly common and a growing worry to parents and teachers. In Underage Sex, our focus in Britain, Tim Hewitt looks at the extent of the problem and at what's being done to encourage restraint and responsibility.
It is disco night for the under-17s. No drink, no drugs, and if the parents have their way, no sex. It seems a vain hope. A survey for one family planning service says 41% of 15-year-olds have had intercourse.
It was more influence from my friends, actually, because I don't know, you want to be like everyone else. You don't want to be the odd one out, so you sort of get pressured into it sometimes.
Amanda is 14. This is Jake. His mother is 15. She first had sex at 13.
I sort of knew about condoms, but most blokes will not wear them, and I didn't think I could get the pill.
Anita Nake is a teenage agony aunt who gets 1,000 letters a week.
I'm a 13-year-old girl. I need your help because my boyfriend, who's a year older than me, wants to have sex with me. I'm very worried because I know it's illegal. What should I do? He'll leave me if I don't. And that's also very representative of the sort of letters, the peer pressure element.
It is a problem that teachers at schools like the Fernhill Comprehensive in Letchworth are trying to address.
Looking at sexual relationships and how men and women behave towards each other.
Sex education classes emphasize the social as well as the biological. There's talk about communication, relationships, aggression. Today, students are discussing their attitude to rape. Fernhill believes it's more enlightened than most, but sexual pressures are all too evident.
The pressure's all around as well. It's not just boys, girls, girlfriends pressure, the other friends saying, oh, well, we've done it, why don't you?
No, everyone says teenage girls, they're going to have sex, whatever, anyway. So I think you feel abnormal if you don't.
Many parents are alarmed by the statistics on underage sex, and teenagers generally agree it does happen at an earlier age. But has sex education helped? Has it made for a more mature outlook, a more responsible attitude? A Family Planning Association survey found 2/3 of schools teach nothing about contraception. Half don't mention AIDS. At Fernhill, they're introduced for 13-year-olds. Some think it's too late, others that it makes little difference.
I mean, you don't learn much at school, and what you do get taught about, it's usually too late anyway.
But especially at parties, people get drunk and they just get carried away and they don't think. I mean, and you end up in bed with somebody you don't even know.
Boys from one class of 15-year-olds claimed as many as 9 of the 21 in their group had had sex.
Boys just take advantage of girls if they've got the chance to.
Sometimes people just do it out of the heat of the moment, don't use contraception.
That amazes me. It doesn't frighten me. It amazes me that I can think of my son, who will be 14 in July, coming up to be able to say that sort of thing.
And for concerned parents, the figures suggest an alarming trend. In the middle of the swinging 60s, less than 5% of teenagers had had underage sex. Now the experts fear that those who say no will soon be in the minority. Tim Hewitt, News at 10, Letchworth, Hertfordshire.
As the law stands, there's no requirement for schools to include sex education in their curriculum. That decision is left up to school governors. And finally, the last brushstrokes are being applied to a masterpiece that's been worked on for more than 100 years. ScotRail says it can't afford to keep painting the 4th rail bridge. Here's ITN's Hugh Pym.
200 trains go across it each day. Tourists and locals love the ride. Each passenger's convinced that when the men who paint the 4th bridge get to one end, they have to start again at the other. That's a myth, although painters are working on the bridge throughout the year. But more than a century of constant brushwork will end in April because it's too costly. Essential maintenance apart, one of the best-known traditions in railway folklore is to be abandoned.
This year we'll concentrate on painting those parts which are essential for safety reasons, but in future years we must wait and see. We must wait and see what money is available.
Money was never a problem in the early days. Then as now, painters worked on all parts of the bridge, sometimes 300 feet above the water.
Do you ever feel a bit scared up there? I'd be a lie if I said I'd never, but I used to at first, but no, it's second nature.
There are 750,000 square metres of steelwork on the bridge to be painted. Every year they use 17 tonnes of paint. But from April, the annual workload will be cut back by 2/3. So for the local firm that produces those tons of paint, cutbacks in orders, it's made this special weatherproof coating ever since the bridge opened. And it's without that coating that the bridge is preparing to weather its 2nd century. Hugh Pym, News at 10 on the 4th bridge.
That's News at 10 tonight. I'll be here again tomorrow. Until then, from all of us here, good night.
Well, it's been another grey and misty day for most of us, and it looks like yet another grey and misty day to come through the day tomorrow. We still have high pressure in charge for most of us, in fact right across much of Europe, and that just keeps feeding in all this misty weather and lots of clouds. So a cloudy night, lots of mist around. Where the sky is clear, probably up in the far northeast of Scotland, there you're likely to see some quite dense fog patches, perhaps even freezing fog patches too, and the odd spot or two of drizzle here and there. But generally speaking, temperatures overnight around 3 degrees Celsius, but just as I said, where those cloud breaks enough, you may just get a touch of frost. So for tomorrow, well, it's another grey and misty day for most of us. The odd patch of drizzle here and there, particularly near the coast of both eastern England and northwest Scotland. A couple of things happening through the day. I think you'll find the dense fog going away from the Moray Firth, little bits and pieces of sunshine coming out there, Central Highlands too. May even brighten up a little bit in Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, even northeast of England may get rid of its fog finally by the end of the day. Temperatures tomorrow, well, these are pretty much what we saw today. Reasonable average is 5, which is 41 Fahrenheit. But up there in the far northeast again, you're likely to see 9, which is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. That's it from me. Good night.
Now the news from ITN.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
America's ready to send peacekeeping troops to Bosnia. Government calls Tory rebels bluff over Maastricht. How an IRA bomber went undercover in suburbia. And babies can drink it, but why was the apple juice scare kept secret? Good evening. America announced tonight that it's putting its weight behind the diplomatic attempt to negotiate peace in Bosnia and said that it might send troops. Their job would be to enforce the deal. President Clinton has also decided on tougher economic sanctions against Serbia. His Secretary of State Warren Christopher said America's conscience wouldn't passively accept the Serbs' brutality. The new administration had hesitated for a fortnight before announcing its policy in Bosnia. Our Washington correspondent Bill Neely has the details.
The people demand and deserve...
Bill Clinton is backing into Bosnia. The president who once said he wouldn't send troops there is poised to do just that and confident of public support.
I think they will want us to do more, want us to do it in a prudent way, and I think that they will support this cause.
We cannot afford to ignore it.
The US said today it would now get involved in the peace talks directly, and if there is agreement, it would help enforce it.
We are prepared to use our military power to enforce the agreement if necessary, and I hope that it will be
The vote is in about 6 weeks' time. Here's our political editor, Michael Brunson.
The Downing Street line today, reinforced perhaps by the gift to the Prime Minister of his grip cast in bronze, is that they will not lose the vote on the Labour amendment. But Norman Tebbit doesn't believe it, so he's pressing on with his campaign against what he called today the foul abomination of the Maastricht Treaty, though he insists that voting for the Labour amendment does not mean voting for the social chapter.
What we're supporting is an amendment which would take it out, and we could vote against any other amendment, but it only requires one amendment to be made to this treaty for the whole treaty to collapse. And that's why I said today that personally I would vote for an amendment which said the moon was made of blue cheese if it was going to get a majority, because that would destroy the treaty.
Necessary to reach that point.
The US also promised tougher sanctions on Serbia, a war crimes tribunal, and more humanitarian aid. US troops would not be sent in to stop the fighting. They would go as part of a multinational peacekeeping force that would include British, French and Russian troops. But first, there has to be a peace to keep. Leaders of the warring factions are at the United Nations in New York, but have yet to meet. That's the next step. The Bosnians today welcomed the offer of US troops, saying their cities have been bombed back into the Stone Age.
Population in eastern Bosnia and Herzegovina is the most endangered species in the world at this moment.
Let's go get him, knock him down, stop this fooling around.
On the talk show circuit, Lord Owen, selling his peace plan that America once ridiculed but is now using as its blueprint, and urging the US to send 5,000 troops in a 20,000 troop force.
And when is the United States going to have its own GIs in blueberries? Here you are, the most powerful country in the world. How much longer can you stand aside and not contribute forces in any serious numbers to UN peacekeeping?
Today's decision represents a major shift in American policy, committing troops, if necessary, to what the US once called a quagmire. Bill Neely, News at 10, Washington.
Here, the government raised the stakes tonight in the Conservative Party row over Europe. The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd said it wouldn't ratify Maastricht at all if a Labour amendment on the social chapter was carried in the Commons. Lord Tebbit had earlier urged his fellow rebels to vote with Labour to wreck Maastricht, and he welcomed Mr. Hurd's statement.